Hello. On today's live, we're talking about ABM strategies on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from all of you that have joined. And where are you with ABM? Are you thinking about it? Have you got a fully fledged strategy in place? Just let me know in the comments. Do you have any ABM challenges? Now, that would be a good one because I'm joined today. My special guest is Riaz Kanani. Riaz, introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. So Riaz Kanani. I am the founder of Radiate B2B. Radiate is an ABM platform and agency. We focus on display and LinkedIn advertising, unsurprisingly, B2B organizations.
And I'm Laura Hannon, and I'm the founder of Pitch One to One. So, taking all of your questions on paid, and I'm on the organic side of things. So, between us, we should be able to help out with any of your challenges. But actually, just a quick one before we get started on the nitty gritty of LinkedIn. We probably should just frame things, a bit of context on what is ABM, what is account-based marketing. I know it means different things to different people. So I think, Riaz, you and I had a chat about that a long time ago. What would you say ABM is?
So ABM, account-based marketing, it's been around for, believe it or not, 20-something years now. So a long, long time. But most people started to hear about it probably around about 6-7 years ago. So time's flown by, actually. And the reason account-based marketing has become more popular is primarily because technology has allowed it to be used by more companies. So ABM is this idea that you can target or create a marketing strategy for an individual company. So you pick your prospect and you put together a program for just that prospect. And so unsurprisingly, you've got a salesperson, a marketing person, maybe even some other people, a product person, all sitting around a table thinking about how to win this customer. And obviously that's super expensive. And there's very few companies in the world who can actually implement strategies like that. So you fast forward a bunch of years and technology platforms allow you to take that thinking of individualized personalization and scale it up. And so today we have 3 strategies: a one-to-many ABM strategy, where you take 500, 1,000 companies maybe, and put together a program designed for that particular group. One-to-few strategy, which is maybe, say, 50 companies, and put together a program for that. And then, of course, you still do have the one-to-one strategy where you are thinking about how you attack that one particular prospect.
Yeah. You know what, I think of it as but in the sort of creation of the content, I think of it as the salespeople need to sort of bring that feedback loop in what they've learned about the client, so that the content, along with the research and everything else that you know about that account, will go into such relevant content for the different job roles within that account. And then I think of the set that sort of comes back over to sales, and I think of them as being like worker ants on LinkedIn, sort of delivering this content to the eyeballs that need to see it. And it does mean that it's kind of changed the sales job on LinkedIn, that they are sort of the deliverers of content in a way. And that's why LinkedIn's so good for this, but not without its challenges, right?
No, but that is exactly one of ABM's strengths, right? It allows you to, well, if you think about the old marketing way, you didn't always put the customer at the center. And by involving sales and marketing, as you're talking about, you're now thinking right the way through, beyond the MQL, if you've heard of marketing qualified leads, right the way through to close. But that does bring the challenges that you're talking about, right? That alignment between sales and marketing is really, really important. If we have worked with clients where literally the marketing team turned around to us and said, "We don't need to have the sales team in the room for this, do we? Um, um, and of course, the minute we heard that, we knew that we needed to extend the session on sales and marketing alignment, because it really doesn't work if you don't have both the marketers and the salespeople in the room. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges overall across all ABM beyond even LinkedIn. But the other ones that especially apply to LinkedIn are, for me, the data side. Data is always a problem, and if you aren't confident in the quality of that data, you can start to do silly things. Even LinkedIn had, I mean, so for example, my profile, I don't even know, but I think my profile lists me as being in the internet industry, or may even be the marketing industry, because I work in marketing and I run a technology platform. So which is it? And so when you're targeting companies, you have to think about those sorts of nuances with your data. And then, of course, I talked a little bit about ABM of old versus ABM today, that scale issue of how much time is it actually worth putting into this, and what is the return from that? And so we often talk with clients about leveling up the investment from a time standpoint in particular prospects, depending on who they are. So someone who's very strategic, fine, you might be very happy to put time in to nurture them manually. But other companies, you may want to start with some automated advertising to nurture from afar, before moving to the more one-to-one approach as the funnel.
If anybody has a specific challenge with executing the ABM, this is definitely the time to put a comment in. I think that the challenges on the organic side are about joining the efforts, and I'm not just talking about the content to the right person. I'm talking about you would need multiple people from your organization connected to multiple people from your target organization, and being able to really get them working together in the same direction is quite challenging. Sometimes because we manage profiles, we're almost like puppeteers, where we're like, no, now this person needs to connect to this particular buying group, and this is the content that's going to come from that. And it's actually I don't know of many companies that have been able to do that in an organic way, without sort of some real thinking behind it. And maybe with the use of Sales Navigator, it can be realized. But I think a lot of companies are still at the stage where they know that their CEO needs to be active. They know that their CTO, if they're selling into CTOs, ought to be active, but they're kind of doing their own thing. They're not necessarily sort of connecting in a strategic way to the different buying groups in the company. And that's what I think, if you can nail that, from an organic perspective, that's how you can get your posts seen organically by that account that you're targeting. And it's very difficult to do unless it's accompanied by connecting as well as nurturing. So it's quite interesting that there's really different challenges, aren't there, on the organic to the paid side?
Yeah, there are.
Yeah. When it comes to LinkedIn, it is quite noisy. I was just reminded of a stat this morning, which was about the increase of salespeople on LinkedIn, which has meant that it used to be, when I was selling on LinkedIn 15 years ago, you could get away with all sorts of things. It was just a lot easier because there wasn't the competition. But there's also the increase of buyers and influencers, and there's a lot of people within the peripheral of the decision makers as well on LinkedIn that you can try to get in touch with. But is there how would you cut through the noise so that you can really stand out and be noticed?
Yeah, I mean, from an advertising standpoint, the the tendency even outside of LinkedIn is it's often generic, right? We have heuristics, heuristics is the word I'm looking for. Well, we seem to know what a B2B ad should look like, and so as a result, the design of LinkedIn ads often can be very, very similar to each other. And so one of the things that I try and hammer home over and over again is that you have to be bold. You have to do something different when it comes to LinkedIn. Ideally, you don't treat it like a banner ad on the display on the internet. You think about it as being content that is valuable, and how are you going to communicate that value through that particular ad? And there's obviously lots of different types of LinkedIn ads that you can do, from an image to, you can still do image carousels on the advertising side, to video, and they all have slightly different aspects to it. But fundamentally, the first mission, if you like, is in that first 3 to 5 seconds. That's all you have as someone scrolls down the page. What is it that's going to grab their attention and cause them to pause? And so often that's the bit that I always emphasize on. What is it that you want someone to take away in that first 3 to 5 seconds glance?
Yeah, that is where there's a lot of similarities with the organic side of things, isn't it? Because video in particular, I think that being brave is it. If it's coming from your personal profile, there's that personal brave thing, and it's about you being more human, because people may follow your brand, particularly if your brand is famous, but they actually will more quickly buy into a person. And so there's that balance between the brand standing out and being brave and memorable, but also the individuals within the organization. And I would say that the trend that is not stopping, and I think that LinkedIn members are slow to get onto, is just getting onto video. And whether that's video in a post, but also if you can have a conversation in the inbox and just jump onto a video call, even if it's only for 5 or 10 minutes, next time they see you, they're going to remember you so much more. It's really... a picture tells 1,000 words, right? But a million words, I'm not sure. But it's just that way of really standing out. Still, I know we keep talking about video, but it's still underused, isn't it?
It is underused. I mean, I do think we tend to see it more on the advertising side. I think because we often use snippets from webinars and the like within that, and it does serve a very different purpose. I almost group carousels and video together because they tend to have a longer dwell time on LinkedIn and a slightly lower click-through rate versus single image ads. So depending on what your goals are, we'll sort of decide which format. But I just want to pick up on one thing about cutting through the noise, which I think links to JP Murphy's question around selecting the most receptive target account. And one of the best things beyond the design of the ad is obviously the audience that you're targeting in the first place. And if you understand the audience and which message is most likely to be receptive to them, then obviously you can design, going back to the design, the campaign to match that audience. And so for somebody outside that particular segment may not find it interesting at all, but because they're in that segment, it stands out to them. And so knowing your ideal customer profile, your ICP, can really make a big difference. And I'll talk a bit about the impact on the results of that a bit later on. When it comes to deciding whether to use one-to-one or one-to-few, I mean, in LinkedIn, it's a bit more difficult actually, because from a paid standpoint, you can only target a minimum of 300 companies usually, and around about 10,000 contacts. So there's ways to get over the minimums, but that does mean if you are trying to target an individual company on LinkedIn, you also have to waste a lot of media targeting other companies at the same time. For some companies, that can still make sense, because if you do it well, you can still do it for a reasonable sum of money if the contract value is correct.
And isn't there an element of sort of dynamic content that's available on that as well?
Yeah, that's right. And that's how you decide really whether somebody should go into a one-to-one or one-to-few. In my view, it's all about insight. It's very, very rare you want to select a company for a one-to-one campaign right from the very outset. You probably want to use signals, as we call them, that suggest you want to first initiate a broader advertising campaign to them, and then based on their engagement or their interaction, then you might move them through to a one-to-few or one-to-one. And so intent data is one part of the puzzle to helping select companies.
Yeah, and actually intent is a topic that is just getting more and more popular as well. Again, it's not a new topic, but it seems that I was at an event recently and they were talking about the end of the MQL, that we should no longer take that one signal by that one person in that one company as a lead, that it's about a collection of activities. And if anybody's got any questions about intent, I know this is a topic that you're deeply involved in, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously. So we have a lot of intent data that we use to power campaigns, from activity or behavior on the website as one indicator of intent, activity outside of your website, so what people are browsing, hiring activity, changing jobs as an activity. So lots of different things that for different companies, each one has different weightings, and based on that, we then pull effectively a custom feed of companies that are showing signals. I think the reason why intent data is so important today is the buyer has changed, and it's actually why advertising and LinkedIn organic is even more important today than it was a couple of years ago even. So it's no surprise Generation Z is increasingly in the in work and actually in the buying decision maker role. And there's a couple of things that have changed about that particular generation broadly. One is they tend to do more research away from the seller. And so if you're not listening to those signals and instead you're waiting for them to come to your website and convert, then by that point, they're probably 70 to 80% of the way through the buying cycle. And worse, I think, the majority by far have already shortlisted in their head who they want to go for. So Generation Z is 30% more likely to be brand conscious of who they've selected. And so your organic outreach, that's nurturing those people, really, really important.
And out of that short list, they may well have a favourite who's written the brief.
Yes. Exactly.
So let's have a look at where we're going with ABM strategies on LinkedIn in terms of reporting, because there's very different reporting, I think, when it comes, very little reporting on the organic side. I think you do a little bit better on the paid side. So
not much. I mean, obviously you get campaign level reporting, and actually there is a way, and it often gets overlooked. There's a demographics button that you can click on. It's hidden around in the top right of the campaign view, which allows you to drill down and get a feel for how performance of your campaign is doing by job title, to see how companies are doing in terms of which companies are engaging directly with your ads. And so that can give you some indicator from an ABM standpoint. If you are using a company list, you can actually go into the audience view and you can start to get a feel for how companies from that list are engaging both organically and from a paid standpoint with your content. And so that gives you a feel from an ABM standpoint. It's nowhere near as granular as we can get in the display channel, where we can go right down to an individual company, know their location, pretty much narrow it down to 4 or 5 people. LinkedIn's a bit harder, but they're more likely to engage and stick their hand up, if you like, by liking, commenting, or sharing sometimes. So.
Yeah, but so many of the LinkedIn audience are passive, particularly if you're a well sought after B2B buyer. It's a lot of them know better than to openly engage, don't they? So it's quite challenging. On the organic side of things, one thing that we would do in our agency is a little bit of manual work using the analytics that we've got, where it came in when creator mode came in, that you could see a bit more of the demographic data on each individual post. And if you look at it on individual posts and then sort of add it up across all your posts, it is actually better than the summary view that you get. And annoyingly, they say, 1% of your impressions were from this company. So then you go, okay, well, I had 3,000 impressions. Then you add that.
You have to do the maths.
Exactly. And but it does give you a bit of a sense when you do it over a period of time across a number of people from your organization. You then start building up a picture organically just from that view on which companies are viewing your profiles the most and which ones are viewing your posts the most. And one thing that we found by doing it at scale, which was really interesting, is that the individuals that were connected the most were also the ones viewing the posts the most. And you don't get to see the long tail. You only get to see the top 5. I think they're going to extend it, which we're quite excited about. LinkedIn geeks getting excited about that, but it's but it then has given us the signal of understanding if we missed out that step in terms of lead nurturing, or if we added that in, does that then make it more likely or not for the post to come up in the feed? And it's quite interesting. It's sort of how you can do it is you have a few people from your organization connected to your key stakeholders. And if your colleagues like your post and you've been liking their post, then that post is more likely to come up in the feed. And then you do that at scale across an organization, and that's when you get that correlation. But you wouldn't know that unless you were spending a bit of time on individual posts.
Analyzing the data.
Yeah. I bet you're pleased you're on the paid side now. It's
a little bit easier on the paid side in that sense.
Anyway, talking about organic and paid, we've been one side of the fence and the other, but they can work together, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're friends in the end.
I mean, for me, obviously organic, the beauty of it is you don't have to pay for each impression, and it allows you to do I think more. I think for me, the bigger experimentation is often done on the organic side. So you can be a little bit more out there on the organic side, if that makes sense. And then you can look at the results and translate that into bigger advertising campaigns and use that, use the success from the organic to then translate into. So we often will boost posts that are performing well on the one hand, on the organic side, but then obviously getting more reach. And in theory, it should replicate the performance.
Yeah. Are you doing that on a post that has done quite well and then you put some spend behind that one, or are you looking at a format and then later on doing a paid post of a similar kind of content?
Both.
Yeah.
Very much both. We typically will always boost that existing post first because we know it's working. So the challenge with all posts is that there can be a time element to it. And so when you're testing later, you have to watch to see, is the performance matching what you expected it to be? And was there a time element to this? In which case you need to take that into account for the next evolution of this post, so to speak. So yeah, there's lots of different variables that you have to keep in mind from a testing standpoint.
And it's also about the timing, especially when it's like maybe a bit of PR or newsjack or something like that. We tested whether if the organic is sort of gaining momentum and you get 10,000 impressions going, okay, this is a good one, and maybe it could have some media spend behind it. And that we did have a theory where perhaps it might just give it a boost, and then it continues organically if you switch off the paid, and it doesn't. Once the money's gone, it's gone, right?
Yeah, that makes that's, I suppose, not a surprise. The other area where I think we work well together is thought leadership posts. And obviously, from the organic side, you'll be powering lots and lots of effectively thought leaders on LinkedIn. And we find they work very, very well. People, especially higher up the funnel, will relate more to the individual than they will to the brand. And it's only once they move down the funnel that the brand becomes, I would say, just as important. Some might argue more important. But I always think the individual's slightly more important. So
yeah, maybe it depends on the brand.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah, I think one thing with the individuals is if you have, well, something like this, a LinkedIn Live, and it's got our faces all over it, and it's us promoting it, our network will recognize us and, get involved and engage, and that's where it works really well. But thinking about anybody who's doing PR or getting articles published, sort of advertorials and things, is having that spokesperson and just making sure that they as individuals are posting it. I see a lot, and maybe no post at all from the individual, it's just coming from the company page, and or maybe a repost, and you've missed an opportunity by not making it an original post to really boost it within your own network. And then of course a bit of thought leadership ad behind it as well is the it goes far and wide.
Yes, completely.
Talking about far and wide, it sounds quite expensive, doesn't it?
Well, it can be, especially compared to display advertising. It can be very expensive, but there are absolutely reasons why you would still do LinkedIn versus display. Display tends to be brand led. LinkedIn does tend to be much more interactive, if you like. People tend to be reading on LinkedIn, so they're more likely to read your ad and see your ad consciously versus display. The major impact on cost, from our experience, often relates to the size of the audience that you're targeting. Typically, if you are targeting a large enough audience, and by large enough, I typically say 30,000 people, 50,000 people, what you're then able to do is to take real advantage of LinkedIn's own algorithms that are optimizing the campaigns and will generally lead to a lower CPM, which if a lower CPM cost per 1,000 advertising impressions, and that means you'll reach more people for the same amount of money versus a higher CPM. But of course, some of our clients have very, very tight ideal customer profiles. And so, to give you a broad view of cost from a CPM standpoint, we've seen campaigns that are 20, 30, 40 pounds per 1,000. So 20, 30, 40 pounds CPM when you're targeting at larger scales. When you're targeting smaller segments, though, it can really rise. So that customer, for example, who's targeting a very, very tight niche, we're seeing £100 CPMs, £200 CPMs, and you have to make a decision as to whether that is worth the money. In effect, I mean, that's what you have to be looking at. What's the performance cost? What's the goal of this ad? And for some companies, the opportunity is high enough that it makes sense to do so.
I'd love to hear in the comments if anybody is going, yes, I know I'm paying a high price for my ads. It'd be really good to hear from you. But even if you're organic, it's not free. is it? Particularly when you have senior members of the team, highly paid individuals that are spending part of their working day on doing LinkedIn best practice, which isn't just about it's not just one activity, is it? In order to get your post seen, you need to be engaging with other people's posts. You need to be commenting, liking, getting connected to the right people, having follow-up conversations. Or if you work with an agency like ours and have it done for you, obviously there's a cost involved with that. And so whether you do it yourself or not, it's certainly not free as much as it might be free to be on the platform. I would say that if you're spending regularly half an hour a day on LinkedIn, it's worth spending the Sales Navigator, because that will make you more efficient, where you're strategically commenting. You're able to join forces with colleagues, share lead lists and things like that, know who's connected to whom. And that's not very cheap, but I've had a lot of people do workarounds to not pay for Sales Navigator. But if you're spending a lot of time, it is worth the money, typically. I think that we get asked a lot about, how much does a campaign cost? And I think that you do need to think of it as a longer term strategy. And as much as we might be making a plan for the first 3 or 6 months, that it's consistency over time that gets you better results. And that think of it as an annual budget or an annual campaign, or something that you need to find the time for annually. I feel like I'm putting people off. I don't mean to at all. Obviously, love LinkedIn. But it's the only place, isn't it, where you really can see the job title, the latest interest, the companies that they work for. You don't really get that from any other platform. I don't think, anyway.
No. I mean, well, our display platform will give you that, because we effectively replicate LinkedIn across the internet. But yeah, beyond that, no.
I was teeing you up for that.
I know, thank you.
I feel that we're sort of getting to. Is there anything else that you think is relevant for the audience who are looking to execute?
I suspect just one thing that I suspect the audience might like to know is what does success look like from an ABM LinkedIn standpoint? So maybe quickly touch on that. I'd say it's a journey, right? I mean, to your point about putting people off, is you don't need to conquer Everest in a day, right? You absolutely build layers of complexity over time. The paid side is no different. You might start with a single segment targeting via LinkedIn, and when you're doing that, it's not unusual for us to initially see click-through rates. And to be clear, when we look at success, we often will go beyond the click to look at dwell time on the website, conversion into pipeline, etc., etc. But click-through rates are much easier to get a gauge in this conversation, because it does differ by client beyond that. Initially we'll often see 0.1, 0.2, maybe touching 0.3 off the first campaign, with a very good ICP selection to start with. But within a month, 2 months, that's typically transformed to 0.4 to 0.6% sort of thing for an ABM campaign. And again, usually by 3 months, we're typically seeing 0.8, 1.2% click-through rates. And so you can see the journey that's going on there. And then, of course, you then layer on other types of campaigns, so retargeting campaigns that then will reach people who've engaged previously or been to your website. And to give you a slightly different metric, for this event, I put some advertising behind it to just see and use that metric for a cost per click standpoint. And we were getting a £1 to £2 cost per click for it, and that is pretty typical for what we see.
Fantastic to have those benchmarks. Thank you for sharing those. I do think that it's success means different things to different people. Of course,
It does.
marketing has a different sense of success versus sales, and we like to join that up as much as possible. You know, the marketing to the revenue. One thing that we would measure in terms of success would be having a look at a target account and have we reached what we would term a critical mass, where we would say, okay, this is now warmed up enough that sales can really focus their sales efforts on this account. So have we got connections in each of the buying groups? Has there been enough impressions of profile views? Have there been enough post impressions from people from those companies that will make the sales job a little bit easier in terms of getting the messaging out there? And one thing that we really measure, which is very much an internal KPI, and it's really important to the success of an ABM campaign, is a connection acceptance rate. I know from training salespeople that very often you're seeing a 10% connection acceptance rate. If you're using tools, that is kind of standard, which is awful. You know, most people are rejecting connections. Connecting the right way with senior execs to peers within an organization, you can get 50% plus. We've actually had campaigns with 80%, which is incredible. And the way that you would do it is to go second first, go with more active, go with peers, and sort of connect your way strategically into the account. Once you've done that, what we've found is that the more people from your organization that get connected into that buying group, the easier it gets. So over time, that connection rate goes up the more you cross connect, which means that you're then teeing up your salespeople to have the very best chance of getting connected. And also you've identified which people within those buying groups are more likely to engage on LinkedIn. So it's a little bit of a leg up for sales. They've got to obviously do their magic, but that would be a really good measurement. How many accounts have you warmed up and then sent over to sales? And then obviously you're tracking that opportunity.
Yeah,
Your CRM.
exactly. Yeah.
I feel like it's, sorry.
There's a question from JP Murphy that.
Okay. Yeah. 15 stakeholders in your target account that are part of your decision-making unit, DMU. Does it make sense to have a different message for each DM, or is this overkill? I think that pure ABM would say that you need to have different messages for each decision-making unit. And I would say that there are lots of interpretations of this. That's my view on it. Anyway, I don't know how you feel.
Certainly the pure definition. I tend to be more pragmatic with these things, though, and group by need. So what is the impact for that particular group of individuals? So there may be 15 stakeholders, but actually there'll be a subset within that will have different needs, I would expect. And so therefore you could group that down to get impact. Again, it depends on the client. So if there's 15 stakeholders and the contract is big enough, then you might want to do it individually. But if it's a typical customer that's a £15,000 average contract value annually, then you probably don't.
Yeah, that would be overkill. Exactly. Yeah. I think there's once you've done that account planning and you've done your research on the account, there you can see that there would be different messages to different buying groups. It becomes really quite clear. You may have a whole bunch of people at a certain seniority or within a certain department that you know that is the thing that they're interested in. And a different message to each person is a very manual thing. But if you've got a group of 50, then you're sort of serving up that message. So I think the more enterprise the deal gets, the easier it is to segment that messaging. And as you say, and the higher the value of the deal, then the more it's worth putting the effort in, right?
Yeah.
I feel that we're at a point of rounding up. So do we have, it's quite a lot there. Do we have, let's have a couple of takeaway thoughts, and then I will play the outro, and stay tuned, because in the outro you can scan the QR and attend our next live. So Riaz, I'm afraid you won't be on the next live because you're my special guest today.
I'll check it out.
A little plug in there, and feel free to add your own plug as well. And also anybody who's got any questions that might have sort of cropped up in it and we haven't seen it here yet in the studio, we will come back onto this, and both Riaz and I can answer any questions in the comments. So do keep them coming. And I'm going to let you round up last, Riaz, as our special guest. So let me just have a think about what sort of my roundup would be. That point about starting small, I think, is a really key one. And I think that it's actually really easy when you're doing it. In fact, it's almost harder to not do it in another way, is to start small. And sometimes we just go too big too quickly with the organic stuff, which means that you're spread too thinly. And I would say that the takeaway of it is, when you have a connecting strategy, it might feel that it's going to get really complicated with all of these people connecting to all of these people. But if you do it for one account and then two accounts, and actually start with the one-to-one on a qualified account that you know that you really want to sell into, then it makes it a whole lot easier, and it makes it easier to scale from there. And if you're utilizing Sales Navigator, they actually have all the tools that you can really work, sharing lead lists, who's connected to whom, and you can really work it through Sales Navigator. So that would be my organic takeaway.
Okay. Shall I give the paid takeaway?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you on start small. It is madness to go too big too quickly with LinkedIn paid ads. You can spend an awful lot of money and not learn very much from it. And so start small, absolutely. I think there's three things that you then that are then key to remember. If you know your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and you know the persona, the individuals that you're targeting, that's one big piece of the puzzle. And so spending time on that is key. Once you know that, the messages fall out, and that helps you from an obviously creative standpoint. But even then, once you get those two things right, so the ICP and the individuals, test is the secret sauce of LinkedIn advertising, right? We will typically double or triple performance just by testing alone. And so that would be my big three takeaways.
Thank you so much. Cue the outro. See you later. See you next time.